And this is the director's commentary for the previous Let's Explore Google Search video where we find out what we did wrong. And there was a lot. So this is one of those embarrassing videos where I look at something that I've done and critique it. Now I'm doing that in order for me to learn, because it's important for me to learn, but it's important for all of us to reflect on the testing we do. Right, now in this video I picked Google Search because I thought it's an obvious piece of software, simple to understand. At a high level it's just an input field and a button, and I really didn't expect bugs. So I didn't expect anything that would distract me, and I could just focus on the process of testing and the execution of testing, and I was wrong when I did that. Now I do want to do more Let's Explore type videos because it's an easy way for me to reflect on the process of testing. And reflection is absolutely essential for when we test because it's how we get better. Very often we're testing on our own, we don't have mentors, we don't test in pairs, no one's reviewing our work. We have to do that. We have to do that in order to get our testing better, but also to improve our testing process. Because we know that when we're testing software, we have a model of the software. We compare the software with our model, and then we find gaps in the software and we find gaps in our model. When we reflect on our testing process, we model our testing process, and then we can see gaps in our testing model. We can see gaps in the model of our testing process. We can compare our model to how other people test, and we can see gaps in what they do that we don't do. We can see strengths, things that we do that they do not do. We can see gaps in the technology understanding we have. It's only when we reflect on it and model it and then compare it with a reality that we identify areas to improve or strengthen or promote and work on, or see what makes us unique, what makes us different from the other testers. So this is an important process. Now I know we don't normally make it public, but I'm going to try and make it public to demonstrate what a default looks like and what the reflection process itself looks like. And I will learn from it, and hopefully you'll learn parts from it as well, and I'm prepared to make it really embarrassing for me so that you and I can learn from this. So let me start Alan talking again. So this is like a director's commentary. He's going to be talking, so you might hear him in the background, but I'm essentially going to be talking over the top. So one of the questions that comes up with exploratory testing is, how do you know when you're done? Right, and part of the way that we know that we're done is by setting a time limit. And that's what I did in here. I set a time limit for how long I was going to test. Now the time limit itself doesn't mean that when the time is up you're done, but what it does mean is that when the time is up you can stop and reflect and think, right, what have I learned? If I continue, am I still adding value? What do I want to do next? Is there any value in me continuing? And you'll have a much better idea. And part of the process of what I'm doing here is thinking through my testing as I'm doing it, which is hard. That's a skill. And I think that kind of got in the way of my testing. That's one of my excuses for the mistakes that I'm making here, that I was thinking through the video construction as well as the actual testing that I do. Now I often use the timer from Google because I know how to find it. It's just there, so I can use that timer. And 15 minutes was really just to create a controllable YouTube length of video. It's not it's a bit tight for a testing session length, but that's fair enough. That's the one that we picked. That's the one that we're going with. Now you can see in the logs that I've written down my intent already, because intent is really important. Intent isn't there just to control my testing, it's there to help me understand that I'm making a decision to deviate when I do deviate, and I will deviate when I test from my original intent. But it also lets me come back to the original intent when I do deviate off the rails. And sometimes we go pretty far off the rails. So it's kind of like a decision tree where the top level branch is my intent. I make decisions as I'm going through as to which way I'm going, what I'm doing. You could view it as opportunity cost if you want, balancing these things out, but really we're looking at a decision tree because we're going to have multiple sessions, and we'll overlay the decision trees over time, and we'll get a feel for the decisions we make, the kind of paths we take. And over time, if you do that, you'll get to see the type of decisions that you make, and you'll see the patterns that you have with your test approach. Now when I make notes, I normally put down the timestamps as I'm making them. But I'm using Evernote here. I know that Evernote takes versions and Evernote tracks the times, and it's such a short period of time that I'm not really doing it. But I do make less notes in here than I normally do, and I think that impacted my testing. Also, the date format that I use here is the date format that I use all the time when I'm making notes, which is the year, the month, the day, because that's very easy to sort. I use this in file names, anything that's going to be sortable, I'll generally stick that in the front. If I'm creating test data, that's the format that I tend to use. And if I need more granularity, I'll put the timestamp on the end there in terms of hours, minutes, and seconds if I really need to go down to that level. So timestamps are really important when I make notes, and I don't do that, I don't demonstrate that in here. So one of the first things we notice in the testing as Alan's doing it here is that google.com redirected to google.co.uk. I assume that's based on an IP list, I don't know, but we make a note here that that's something that we might want to test in the future. Because it's important that we recognize what's going on, we recognize things that are outside our existing model of the system, and that's outside my existing model, the Google system. And I don't care about spelling mistakes when I'm typing up my notes. I don't self-edit like that when I'm typing up notes, because I'm just trying to get stuff down and keep the flow of testing moving. Now, you can also see that Google has added extra things in the URL. I don't know if that's important, but what I don't want to do is lose that kind of information in my model of the system, because I don't know what is important. I don't know if those extra fields contribute to the length of the URL getting too big under certain circumstances. Don't know, but I know that that URL is not the one that I typed in, and that's an important point for me to recognize and note. So one of the concepts I have in my high-level model of testing is the notion of observation and interrogation. I'm constantly trying to observe, having the ability to spot things as they happen, to see the system as it's operating, and the ability to interrogate, to drill into something deliberately to understand it. So here I'm drilling into, I'm interrogating that field, and that also has the side effect that with the dev tools up, I observe the changes in the DOM. You can see the flashes happening as the DOM is changing, as I move about, as Google does stuff. So I interrogate the field to see how it's built up, and I can experiment with the field in the DOM level and change it and amend it in different ways if I have to. So things to note are that we can see the changes that Google makes into the DOM as it's working, because there's Ajax going on, there's JavaScript enabled, there's things happening in the background that we might not know about. I can also see the stuff that I don't know. There's essentially a list of attributes there, some of which I understand, some of which I don't. My model of HTML is being stressed at this point, so I'm making a list of what I need to learn in order to improve my ability to test the system. There's a predictive search mechanism in Google when it works. So I presume it's using Ajax calls. I don't have any way of observing that at this point. But I can see the DOM changing as it does, and I can see the ARIA tags matching up with things that are in the combo box. And I know that's not a real combo box because it's an input field. So there's the notion that Google has different rendering for the different parts of the display. So I often copy and paste parts of the system into my notes to allow me to track it and review it later on. Now here I'm being sidetracked because I don't know this element, and that's a decision that I've chosen to make. It's important that we allow ourselves to go off track. But what this really demonstrates is that the knowledge that we need is just a search away. Right, that's one of the important things, the knowledge that we need. If I type into Google, I can experiment with the DOM and work things through. The important point is, when we do deviate like this, we keep it to fairly small time constraint. And at this point, it didn't add value, so we cut this part fairly short as we're working through it. Now, when I look at the system, I don't tend to use a lot of heuristics. What I tend to do is I work on the basis of presupposition analysis. That's one of the things I do. So I'll look at the system and go, what does what the system is telling me presuppose? So in this case, presupposes that I can type in things and click the button and it will search. That's one of the presuppositions that this form tells me. Now it looks like Google doesn't do that. It bypasses that presupposition because it does requests early in order to do the autocomplete. I'm also looking at the input field. Presuppositions are things like I am an input field. You can type in 2048 characters and I will accept it and I will submit it to the backend as a form with the field being called Q, named Q, so we'll send that through. And all of that presupposes that the system isn't lying to me. So that, because this is the model that of the system that I'm working with, I'm just building it up based on presuppositions, based on what I can see. So I can check, I can use the presuppositions as a confirmation approach, and that's my first step to testing this, just confirm that the presuppositions I'm seeing are actually valid and work for me. So at this point I do start with the confirmation of the presuppositions and check at a surface level whether what I'm seeing. Now, in order to help me, I'm bringing in counter strings. Now, I think I learned counter strings from James Bach years ago, and he has a tool for doing it. This is the tool that I've written to do counter strings and help with testing, because it's a Jedi thing. We build our own lightsabers in order to help us test and fit the unique and individual workflows that we have as testers. And at this point, I'm not being guided by the notion of it's an input field, therefore I should max it out. This isn't a big string or a max length heuristic. This is the system says it can handle this input length. So I'm going to give it this input length and confirm that the model that the system has given me actually matches, that the presuppositions at a surface level actually match what the system does. That's what's guiding me at this point. Now, part of the reason that I'm capturing the webcam at this point is to capture facial expressions, so that when something does go wrong, right, we can see it. We can see the confusion on Alan's face there. We can see the emotional reaction he has to the testing, because the emotional reactions that we have are important. And we have to recognize those when we test. So when we are surprised, when we are confused, when we are angry, when we are annoyed, when we are uncertain, we might not see that the first time through. We might see that in our notes. We might see that on reflection. But I mean, it's clear and it's obvious here. And at this point I have found a problem. Now I know that testing isn't just bugs and isn't just problems, but they are important. And that is one of the main things that we do report on. Now I have the issue that I'm trying to think through the testing, think through the problem, and communicate my thought processes as I do it. And that's hard. That's a skill that I have to learn, that I haven't mastered at this point, that confuses me and gets in the way. But I am making notes about it, so it's in my log. What I'm not writing down are the things I'm confused about, the things I'm seeing that surprise me. I'm writing down pretty much just what I'm doing. It's very much a process-based log. Now the presupposition approach, or that I use, will lead you to many of the heuristics that you lead online, but I tend to model based on presuppositions. I'll model the system. In my approach is pretty much, I have modeled the system, there's the system, I will find a way of asking the system a question such that it confirms or allows me to expand my model. That's my essential, how I think of my basic approach to testing at this point in time. So I'm asking questions of the system. Right now I possibly should have binary chopped at this point, but I'm conscious that I'm making a video of the system and I'm trying to add value when I make the video, but I'm also not sure whether it is a length related issue or not. I don't really know whether it's length or whether it's content. I'm assuming it's length, but I don't know if it's near to 2048 or just wildly out, in which case a binary chop would be better. But I was brought up in the good old days of off by one errors and boundary value analysis, and those habits are hard to shake, so I try 2000 as something close to, and then I backtrack to the binary chop strategy that you can see. And this is interesting to me at this point because, right, this is where pairing might help. This is where reflection as you test is very important, because I completely miss the information that's in front of me. I completely miss the fact that I've put in a request that failed, that when I do back works. There's some strange interaction in the system that I haven't observed at this point, and I'm still carrying on through my length investigation model, which clearly isn't valid, but I haven't seen it. So having inbuilt reflection points in your process is important, which I normally get as I'm making notes. Pairing with people can be useful because your pair might point this out. If both of you are being sucked into the same bias that's not allowing you to observe what's happening, then you have a problem. But we have to learn how to overcome our biases, and for me, most of the time, making notes is what helps me do that. But in this case, I'm not making as many notes as I normally do, and I'm kind of relying on the video doing the note taking. And that's a lesson for me. Any video we do of this in the future is not going to have this format because it messes up my test approach. So I'm essentially testing blind at this point because my model is wrong. But at this point, I think I almost realize that something is happening, but it's not quite there. So I do stop in a second to try and reflect about what's happening. Because we need those step back, see what's going on, reflect about how our model matches the system. There we go. I physically step back from the system in order to get a breakpoint and think through what is happening with my test approach. And I'm confused. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So I use the get method by just hitting the URL through again. I'm trying to rule out the spaces or asterisks as the data format because I haven't got my head around what the problem is here. And it's hard watching this because I know that I haven't ruled out I kind of almost ruled out length during the testing here because we know that it is accepted, the same length is accepted and rejected. So there's some other mechanism going on, but in the video I am really hung up on length throughout this entire video. And I guess that when we're in the zone of testing we miss things if we don't have that step back and reflection point. And I think what's interesting is one of the intents I said when I started was to learn and test. One of the intents that I had was to make a video, to speak out loud as I'm testing to try and add value to the viewer, to create a YouTube video that people can watch and then I can comment on later on. And that intent was missing from my statement of intent in testing. And not having that full model of what I was doing as I was testing has probably changed the approach to testing and the observation that I put in. And I didn't put in the checks and balances to offset some of those extra processes that I've put in. I didn't reflect enough as I was testing in order to mitigate some of that risk. So I want to increase my ability to observe. So that's important. And when I'm thinking through I need more tools. So having an extra tool in is a useful thing. But because I haven't yet realized that doing a get causes a different effect than the form submission, my observation in Fiddler is off to a bad start. It's off to the wrong start, essentially. And as a viewer, I'm confused because what I'm seeing in Fiddler is not what I'm seeing on the browser. So even watching this back, I don't know what model Google is doing. So at this point, I really want Alan to stop, reflect, build a better model in Google so I can understand what's going on. And I haven't done that yet, so I really need that to happen in order to understand the problems and impact that I'm seeing at this point. Now, it might be obvious to you, the viewer, you might have a better model, but it's not obvious to me yet how Google is working here. Now, I find this whole section of the video hard to watch because it's true we haven't ruled out length, but Alan seems hung up on it. So I'm just going to jump ahead to a different part of the video that I think adds a bit more value, and then we'll start from there. So I think using Composer to send the requests is a good idea. And if we were trying to experiment with the length hypothesis, using Composer is good because I can amend the requests and here I can issue them through. But and using the request to fail is a good thing to try. But at this point, we really Alan messes up, and he really doesn't realize at this point. That's not the request that we want to see. I've no idea why it's not copy and pasting. Why it's not moving properly, and then when I do copy and paste I do it just wrong. Right, I copy from the raw request with the get verb and the HTTP format and then paste it into the parsed view, the GUI part, and it's not gonna work, and I haven't spotted it. Now what I find interesting in here is that Fiddler does highlight that there's an error in the request, but it doesn't tell me what the error is. Now clearly at this point I'm blaming the tool for something that I haven't figured out, which I shouldn't do, but it'd be nice if Fiddler, when it spots an error in the request, actually tells you what the error is, rather than just showing a big red, there's something completely wrong with your input here, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. And I know that I spend a little bit of time trying to figure out what is going on here and where that error is reported. But I'm clearly trying to blame the tool for just my inability to use it. So if I skip ahead here, then we get saved by the bell and the pain is over. I mean, in retrospect, it wasn't that much time where I was confused, and there were some reflection points in there. And I hope that in a real testing scenario, it wouldn't have gone so badly wrong, because I would have been making more notes, I would have been tracking my decisions. Right? Normally I would write down what I'm confused about. I would write down what decisions I've made, and that helps me step back from the current process and have a reflection as I'm going through. The biggest thing for me out of this is stressing the presupposition approach. A confirmation start point from that will lead you to where you get from some heuristics, but making sure that you have that built-in process of being able to step back and reflect on your work as you do it in order to try and avoid some of these dead ends that we hit fairly quickly in here. Now, I will be doing more of these type of videos. I suspect there'll be a slightly different format. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video.